Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hop-Ons podcast, a community review podcast sponsored by our Patreon supporters. My name is Colin Cox.
My name is John Phelps. I startled myself because I hit my whole desk and shook everything. Colin, hello.
John, what's the rumpus?
Oh, Colin.
John.
Jesus, Tom, they took his hair. That's strange, isn't it? That's my favorite line from Miller's Crossing.
I have a Miller's Crossing story.
Oh, do you? What's your story?
Well, do you remember the first time I watched it? You were there. Do you remember this?
I don't. Did I show you this film?
No. Well, no. So, patron, Rob Case.
Oh, Rob showed us the film. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if Rob is currently as jazzed about the Coens as he was about 15 or so years ago, but he couldn't stop talking about these guys. And so
Loves
I
these
don't
fucking
remember
guys.
why,
Yeah.
but he had just graduated from college. He was back living at his parents' house. And for whatever reason, John, we just went to their house and watched Miller's Crossing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That was a good
It was a good time.
night,
It was a great time. Yeah.
What a flick. One of the more underrated Coen brothers films. It might be
doesn't
my
seem like-
favorite. It's up there.
Yeah, because I don't get the impression that people watch it a lot. You know, relative to like your Lebowskis and
Oh, yeah.
you know,
Yeah, and your Oh Brother, Where Art Thou's, your
your Fargos maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. Miller's Crossing, important movie for this episode. But John, before we start, we have a new patron.
What? I didn't know that, Colin.
I know. We're recording this 2 days before Christmas. This is
Yep.
my little Christmas gift to you. I kept it a secret. I mean, you
Bert,
have all the Patreon
I'm so
credentials.
excited.
You could have logged on to see this. But yeah, we have a new patron, Mimi.
Mimi?
Yeah.
Mimi's great. I know Mimi. She's fantastic.
Do you know Mimi?
She's a very lovely person. Mimi,
Well.
thank you.
Mimi decided to support the podcast, and because of this, they have access to all of our exclusive Patreon content. For example, for the month of December, and this would be December 23 because we're releasing this
Yes.
in January of 24. John and I, as we did at the end of 2022, discussed our favorite movies from 2023. No surprise, there were some Tom Cruise entries.
Yeah. He seems to be the thread that weaves everything together. I guess we also should probably make the announcement here, don't you think?
Yeah, because we announced it to our patrons. I was thinking how we should do this. So we're ending the podcast.
Okay, well, there it is. It's just
Band-Aid.
Just slap it right out. We are ending the podcast. The Hop-Ons podcast will come to an end after season 6 of Community is done. I would imagine there will be a few things here or there that we might want to discuss. I know if the movie ever comes out, that's something we'll want to talk about. I'm sure the next Mission Impossible movie will have to get an episode. So there are things that we want to discuss, but we want to let everyone know that the show will be coming to an end. We still will be making Patreon content until that happens. Mm-hmm. And if you want to hear all the backlog of Patreon stuff, it is just $3 a month to go listen to that. So just letting you know that's going to happen. When we get to it, it will be a lot more sad than it is now. But right now, we're doing fine.
Yeah, we
okay.
are. And John's right. We won't just erase the podcast from the internet. We just won't offer weekly updates. But who knows? As John said, I think when we announced this to our patrons back in November, if we have a wild hair, we might just release an episode. Who knows?
Yeah.
We may just decide to do an episode on Miller's Crossing. Who knows? But this will be a kind of end to the podcast. But if you also wanted to support us through Patreon, but you didn't, for whatever reason, want to make a monetary show of support, you can just follow the podcast. I think we mentioned this at the end of season 5. Mm-hmm. Patreon now has this feature where you can subscribe, I suppose, to the podcast.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you'll have access to all of that Patreon content, but it's a way of just showing us your support. And if you decide to support us, we'll do exactly what we did for Mimi or anyone else. We will recognize you here on the podcast. So that's maybe a benefit, I guess, right? Yeah.
So yeah, that's it. That's our announcement. Don't freak out. It's not because Colin hates my guts or something. He is pursuing a degree that he's wanted to pursue for a long time. And, you know, he needs time to do that. He can't talk to my goofy ass every week. So there you go. That's what's happening.
There's a lot of things happening, but that's definitely the main and primary reason.
There you go.
And the podcast, as we discussed, it's a lot of work. It's a wonderful lot of work, but it's a lot of work nonetheless. And I think I mentioned this when I spoke to our patrons. I would not want to do this unless I thought I could do it incredibly well, and I just don't think I could manage my time effectively if I pursued this second master's degree and tried to do this podcast the way I like to do it. But John, if you have any questions about this, you can always email us. This is what I say to my students as well. It's like I'm introducing a new syllabus or something. But John, yeah, we are here to discuss Season 6 of Community. Season 6, Episode 1, Ladders. John, this episode originally aired on March the 17th, 2015, not on NBC, but on Yahoo Screens.
Yahoo! I think we're going to do that a lot. Colin, normally
streaming service,
you would do something here where we contextually would go up against shows.
Yeah.
But because we didn't have any shows. Well, I figured out the air dates. Okay, so
oh God.
I know what we've gone up against, and I have.
He did it.
This is a bit of a rabbit hole I went down right before we started recording, and I thought I'm going to do a bit to let everybody come back, welcome in the new year. So this night was March the 17th, 2015. On this evening, Colin, the big winner was on CBS. It was a show called NCIS New Orleans, or Nolans if you're from Louisiana, like I am not. The main character in that
some of the bayous of Atlanta, I've heard also.
Exactly, it was Stephen Weber. So the main character in this NCIS New Orleans is played by Scott Bakula. Are you familiar with this person?
Oh, I've heard this name. Why do I know this person?
Scott Bakula is known as playing Sam from Quantum Leap.
Oh, right.
So that took me down another rabbit hole. So Colin, I have a bit of a bit here. I have a game for you, and here you're going to have to play the song Back in Time, because this is called Bakula in Time.
Back in time.
And so this is where I'm going to read 3 plots from, they're very short, from Quantum Leap, and you have to tell me the fake one. Okay, so
one of these is not real.
One of these is not real.
Manufactured one of these. Okay,
I have manufactured one, and they're very short. Okay, the first one is this: Sam, as a pimply teen whose family troubles resemble ones from Sam's own youth, shows a young Michael Jackson how to moonwalk. That is the first plotline. Okay. The second one, Sam leaps into a space chimp named Bobo.
Okay.
And the third one, Sam leaps back into the body of Pontius Pilate and has to decide to keep things the way they were so that Jesus will die for our sins. Colin, those are the 3 plots. The first one is he teaches Michael Jackson how to moonwalk. The second is he becomes a space chimp named Bobo. The third is he decides to crucify Jesus. This is my first and probably only version of Bakula in Time.
We have to go back in time.
Colin?
Okay. So, funny, Hicks and I on the Clutter Desk just recorded our annual Simpsons episode, and we focused on Montgomery Burns, Montgomery Burns, Mr. Burns.
Okay.
Do you remember the Citizen Kane episode and what his toy bear is called, his Rosebud?
Oh, I don't.
It's Bobo. That's my guess. Number 2. I don't think number 2 is real.
Number 2 is in fact real. He does leap into a space chimp named Bobo. He does teach Michael Jackson how to moonwalk. He did not save Jesus Christ. I made that one up. That is from me.
John,
yes.
Okay, quickly.
Yes.
I thought, does this sound like something a network TV would do? Not necessarily, but the omnipresence of Christianity deceived me a little bit because I thought, is this something John would concoct? Possibly. But also, this is definitely something a TV show would do. My goodness, I am so disappointed. I was deceived by the Bobo of it all.
That was my, yeah. I fucking next leveled you. I Teddy
did.
KGB rounders you with that.
You did.
You had
You
no
did.
idea what I was doing there. Yeah, that
It was
is my
the
very dumb
checkity,
bit.
checkity. Yeah, I know.
I did.
Yeah.
I saw your Oreo and I called it exactly.
Give this man his money.
All right.
John, directed by Rob Schraub and written by one Daniel Harmon and Chris McKenna, which I think people know. Chris
Oh,
McKenna,
okay.
he's written a lot of these, I think, Flash movies.
I think it's Spider-Man. I think it's the Spider-Man movies.
John, this is your IMDb plot summary. Dean Pelton hires an administrative consultant to organize things at Greendale. That's it.
That's not the best. If I saw that, I would think I don't have to watch this episode.
I know. Yeah.
Much like when we watch the first season of each episode, I always like have these thoughts where I don't know how much I'm focusing on the actual like meat and potatoes of the show and more about the production. And especially when you go from a big studio like your NBC's to Yahoo. And at the time, I think this was Yahoo's like big get, right? They had just decided to start a streaming service. They get this, and then from what I understand, Yahoo goes bankrupt pretty close after this.
This was they caught their white whale, and then the whale itself crushed their body underneath its weight. Yeah, no, this, as I understand it, this show and its unfortunate lack of success just destroyed a streaming service. How cool is that?
Oh, that's pretty bad. So a few things I noticed and things I'd like to speak about. I know that this episode is making a commentary on the show changing, and I think it does an okay job. Even if it is heavy-handed, there are some wild fucking choices that get made. Okay. And there are some things that I would like to talk about because I don't understand them. But more importantly, production-wise, they definitely had more money. The cameras looked sensationally good. Everything looked much more high-res, high-def than they were shooting on an NBC. I'm not sure why, but it just looked better. Maybe like the codec you use to put through internet streaming is different than television. I don't know, but it just looked better. But I will say the sound design was dog shit. At one point, they're like in the back room at Shirley's, and I thought, are you guys filming this in a closet somewhere? Because it sounds tremendously bad. Sure. There are interesting choices made with, and I think maybe Dan Harmon here is dipping into like some surreal territory with a few of the things he's doing more than most, specifically that end with Garrett and Leonard. I don't understand for a moment what's happening, and the noose sort of moving and shaking around.
So this is something you'll notice with the end tags. They are, it feels like David Lynch was a guest director for all of the end tags. That's what it feels like, a lot of these.
Okay.
I think it's in the next episode, John. They watch like a foreign language adaptation of Gremlins, and you actually see part of the movie in the end tags. It's really weird. I think you'll really like it, but it's
cool.
really
All right.
weird. Yeah, the end tags are fascinating for this season. I agree with you. There's something ambitious about this season. I really like this episode for a couple of reasons. We can talk about the use of the montage because I want to talk about it a fair amount. This is an episode that overtly references what montages do, and I think we can spend a bit of time discussing the history of the montage, but it's really the Frankie of it all for me, John. I love this character so much. Paget Brewster is so incredibly funny, and I think you will find her just delightful to no end. But something that I thought you would really like about this episode it's just a funny episode of TV. There's a lot of jokes here,
Oh,
and a
yeah.
lot of interesting jokes, and a diversity of jokes. But I want to, yeah, I'm curious to know, because this is an episode that it's as if it forgot a lot of the stuff that happened at the end of season 5, this idea that Greendale must always be a place in peril. And I think that allows us to maybe think about, well, what sorts of changes? Because the end of the last season led us to believe that they made some rather sizable and substantial improvements to this school, but Frankie's appearance would almost suggest that they didn't actually make that many improvements, or those improvements were negligible, perhaps. I have a lot of questions about the framing of the necessity of a character like Frankie for this episode that I think we should probably discuss. So.
Yeah, and I should get back to saying I do like the episode. I think Paget Brewster's very charming. She's very funny. Ken Jeong is really great. He's so fucking funny and wild. I think the biggest, for me, the biggest difference from what I'm seeing versus the previous seasons is how unhinged everyone is. Specifically, Britta has lost her mind. From what I gather, she's homeless now.
Yeah, she's
And-
unhoused at this point. Yeah.
And she is running Shirley's sandwich shop as poorly as a person can do that.
Yeah. It's pretty wild. So.
And I noticed they had more room to swear. There's the bigger swear budget versus NBC. There's a lot of uses of the word bitch
Yeah.
in this episode, and it's longer. It's 5 minutes longer than we're used to.
Yeah, sorry for not mentioning that. I think we mentioned that with previous shows. That now this is a third show, John, that moved from a network to a streaming service, and by doing so, made some rather substantial changes, perhaps to the show's aesthetic, to the way we think about characters, the way characters behave, how they interact. But maybe a great place to start is really with this question of what Greendale is, how this show engages with its mythology, and this sense that Greendale is a place that's constantly experiencing precarity, I suppose, because the season starts with the dean, and it's interesting because, you mentioned the cinematography before. A lot of the opening of this episode is incredibly similar to the pilot episode. The music, I don't necessarily know how often they've returned to that score. The idea that the dean is offering this voiceover, which we see in this episode as well. But in addition to just learning bits of information about our main characters, there's a giant roof collapse, and it's because of all of these frisbees that I suppose just exist on the roof that no one has addressed. And we also see that it's something that Annie, I guess, wanted to address at some point in season 5, but the star fell off the wall and she forgot about it. Is there any way Community can exist without Greendale being in a precarious position? Is this just part of what it means to tell a story for this show, that Greendale must be in a kind of precarious place? Do you have any thoughts about this?
It's a very good question. The show, I think, can exist. Is it? And it's so interesting to say that, because as I'm watching it, and I feel like that's the path they're going down. There were moments when I felt sad, because I did not want this show to turn into some sort of boilerplate kind of spoon-fed, boring sitcom, with your wacky antics of who knows what, a la your Friends type storylines. I like when Greendale is in fucking chaos. I think that's when the show tends to succeed the most, is when these insane things are happening to this group of people. So I think when Frankie came in at the beginning, after the roof collapse, there's a moment when Annie is showing her all the things that she needs to get done in her notebook. and Frankie is checking them all off. Like, we've done that, did that, did that, did that. And it seems like they've hit the end of the list. And even me, and inside for a moment, I think subconsciously I was like, that's a bummer, because what I want more than anything is this show to continue being fucking bonkers. I think that's what makes Community really fun to watch. Yeah. But can the show sustain itself without that happening? I think, sure. Ultimately, this is a show about these characters, and now we're like 2-3 short from what we were when we started.
Yeah.
But the best episodes, the Chaos Theory episode, has nothing to do with Greendale at all. It's just these group of people doing, the most insane things together as a group. So I think as long as you have that core and you figured out that core, it is sustainable. I think Greendale being nuts and Dean Pelton being wacko helps make the show turn a lot better. But at least that's just for me. That's how I feel.
Yeah. Well, no, that's exactly what I think. I've said this before. Greendale is the narrative limitation that makes things possible, because without limitations,
Sure, for sure,
we cannot have stories. There needs to be limitations, deficits, because those create problems. And I agree with you. The Chaos Theory episodes, and you can think of that episode similar to a lot of episodes that are not set on campus, but those almost feel like one shots. They're still part of the larger narrative, but I agree with you. I don't think the show, I think it could have those maybe singular episodes, but all of this really needs to gravitate around Greendale. And I think part of what I like about this season is so many of the episodes are really about Greendale and its absurdities, and I think we see that here as well. So I think I agree with you. We could think about other sitcoms like Frasier, for example, and Frasier has many instances where chaos disrupts this stability that he seems to want to create, whether it's familial, whether it's work. All of these limitations help to make that show possible. And I think Greendale's the same way. Because I think Jeff even says as much at some point in this episode, how much can we improve Greendale before it stops being Greendale? And that almost feels like an author plant in some ways, like someone like Dan Harmon speaking through, or whomever we want to ascribe that kind of creator power to, speaking through one of these characters, because the idea at the end of the 5th season, that almost now retroactively feels more fantastical than anything else, the idea that they saved Greendale. But then again, you have the Dean at the end of season 5 saying something like, in response to one of the school board members saying, but Greendale, despite all of these improvements, is still defined by its precarity. And I think the Dean's response was, well, that's what we call Tuesday. And so I think even at the end of season 5, there is still this promise that it's not like we've fixed and addressed all of these problems. And I like that one of the first things they do is return to Greendale in a state of precarity, because I think that's where the show works best.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think, the idea of Jeff stating this, it is recycled. This was used multiple times in season 5, Jeff having these panics of, is Greendale, should Greendale be saved, sort of thing. Like, when does it hit the point where it's not Greendale anymore?
Right.
And so in that regard, I thought in my brain, I was like, oh, okay, we've been here before, but I think what makes this feel a lot more fresh is Abed's take on the whole thing.
Okay.
Especially with Frankie, I think their dynamic is really good. There's a moment at the beginning where they have this great dialogue where Abed is just stating, I don't think you're good for the group, but I also don't think you're a bad person.
Sure.
And Frankie just does the best way of describing how boring she is in the most non-boring ways possible, and I think that immediately sets a light in Abed's brain. Oh, this person might not be as bad as I think she is. Well, and I like that a lot. I think that's great.
Yeah, no, that's good because she makes reality sound like something one would find in a television show. And I think that's, we can talk about Frankie in a few minutes. She reminds me a lot of early season Arrested Development episodes and a character like Michael, for example, and how I think you and I discussed how everyone in Michael's family is crazy. Michael's particular pathology is the assumption that he's not, in fact, crazy, even though he is. And I think you see something similar with Frankie here, this idea that she thinks, well, I'm not the kind of person who would ever be on a TV show, yet she delivers that description of herself like a crazy person on a TV show. And I think that's what's fascinating about Abed's fascination with her. Abed, he feels a lot like Jeff in those moments when he says
great,
he wants to reject all of the chaos and all of the intertextuality and all of these things that just don't seem indicative of what it means to live in the real world. But if you really think about who Frankie advertises herself to be and the way she presents herself, she's very much just like a cartoonish, sitcom character. And so what's Abed really doing? He's really just choosing a different way to be in a TV show, which I don't know if he's fully cognizant of that at the beginning.
And I think just leaving off that, with as far as Frankie goes, like, she and a few other things in this episode make me really feel like whoever, I guess, Dan and McKenna were big into Lynch at this moment when they wrote this, because the first thing that's so odd is that she gives this spiel to the group when she first meets them, and then she gives the exact same spiel to someone else when she's trying to get a job. And it's if she just sits down and verbatim says what she's supposed to say.
Without question.
And she doesn't get that job because she's supposed to be a character on Community. She's not supposed to be a character. And so that's already fucking wild.
Yeah.
And then you add in like the shit with Garrett and Leonard, which, forget about it. That is so bananas, the end of this fucking thing.
Yeah.
But, and I just realized this, there's like an overarching like narrator, or not narrator, there's like an omnipresent person named Diane in this episode.
Yeah, we
that
can
I
talk
just
about Diane.
I just thought about this, and I thought, oh my god, there's Diane's here.
The Diane thing, we can talk about this. It is interesting because Frankie, and let's just talk about Frankie for a bit. Played by Paget Brewster. The first time I remember her was, funnily enough, on Friends. Do you remember her character on Friends?
I do not. I remember her from Criminal Minds, which is the worst show that I have ever watched. But
so she was dating Joey, and she and Chandler had a thing. And then Joey learns about it, and Chandler had to hide in a box. And
I remember this.
Fingers.
I remember
and
this.
Then later, she cheats on Chandler, and then she's off the show.
Well, what a character! What a beautiful arc written for a woman back in the day,
Sure.
huh?
Yeah. You see, when Joey does it, it's funny.
Right.
But when Paget Brewster does it, she's a whore.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Unreal.
Unbelievable.
Fuck.
Unbelievable. Yeah. But incredibly funny. But speaking of Twin Peaks, she enters this show a lot like Dale Cooper, but because Cooper often is the point of view character.
So right.
But because Cooper's often the point of view character, I think the way we receive her is different. And I was wondering, what do you think Frankie thinks of this group? And I don't know. There's something about, and again, this is one of those interesting, important lessons in point of view, where imagine Twin Peaks, but imagine that Dale Cooper is not the primary point of view character. I think the way we think about him is fundamentally different, and I think the same thing happens here. Imagine this is the pilot to a different show, and Frankie's our quasi-protagonist point of view character. I think the way we think about Greendale is maybe fundamentally different, and the way we think about this character is fundamentally different.
That is so fucking wild and interesting to think about.
Yeah.
Because in reality, like, Abed at that point sort of becomes like a log lady adjacent, because there's
Yeah.
a moment when Frankie says, "I really need someone to show me the ropes around here."
Totally. Yeah.
And Abed's the one that knows the mythos of the school and of these people and of this story, much like the log lady would. That is, holy shit, man. That's good
And
stuff.
this is pre-return, but we get some Jim Belushi stuff as well. John, I thought you would love this, by the way.
I did
one
like
of
the
the
good
funniest things I've
Belushi
ever
joke.
heard. Yeah, we call it the good Belushi.
The good Belushi.
Weird, passionate, and gross.
The good, and God bless him. Jim was trying. He was trying, but he didn't really hit his stride till the return. He's so good in the Twin Peaks: The Return, by the way.
We couldn't. I was thinking about this joke, and I didn't tell you about it deliberately, but this good Belushi joke doesn't really work now because of how good he is in
So
Twin
good.
Peaks.
He's so good.
Dude. Of all of the classes, when is it okay to shake a baby? Is one of
Oh,
the funniest
man.
goddamn things I've ever heard. Yeah,
Her delivery's the best. Her delivery's
the
very,
best.
very, very good.
Yeah.
And should we say a special shout out to Ladders and the professor of Ladders being one of the funniest gentlemen I have ever seen. A very drunk old man who climbs a ladder and falls off of it. So good. No, but anyway, back to Frankie. Frankie is a character who, to me, is, now you've said Del Cooper, I can't think of anything but like Stranger in a Strange Land situation with her.
Yeah.
Which is great because I think they go out of their way at the beginning to make you feel like, at least to me, that they're doing like a Dazed and Confused thing. Like even with Leonard, like that flashback is just so
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
exactly just Dazed and Confused, and then Jeff just wanting to drink, and then the whole drinking thing, and then the whole everybody on campus is drunk thing, and I kept going, oh my God, they're using Frankie as like this, stick up her ass sort of a person that has to come in and reprimand everyone, but no, that's not it at all. Like there are moments when Frankie like is super caring about people. She even really wants to help Jeff if he's an addict, if he's an alcoholic. There's even that moment where she could, sidestep and take a jab at him, but she doesn't. She would like to offer help instead. And so I think, to me, like that's a much better character than just, a militaristic, asshole type character. I think that's great.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating bit of, and an efficient bit of storytelling and character development because, especially with sitcoms, I mean, it's easy to give an audience the generic archetypal understanding of a character in just one episode. Again, just watch the pilot episode of Friends. You know exactly who Joey is. Hey, girls, vaginas. Hey,
How you doing? How
Yeah.
you doing?
But ideally, characters extend beyond those generic archetypes, but that often takes many episodes, many seasons, and some characters never really even achieve that. It is fascinating how they are able to, as you suggested, and I think you're right, show how multifaceted this character is in just one episode. And it's not even primarily her episode. I mean, she spends a lot of time doing things, saying things, being in front of the camera, but we see, again, there's an economy to the storytelling here and an economy to the character development that I think is just something we don't often see in sitcoms. And maybe it is something as simple as having 6 extra minutes, while it may not seem like that much, allows you to do these kinds of things. But we see a fuller picture of Frankie in one episode than we often see of a lot of characters in entire seasons. And that's pretty cool. Pretty cool.
No, and I think that really, to me, is what makes like the shows that you and I have chose to watch in doing this podcast. That's like such an important piece to anything that I want to watch media wise. Like I don't want a character that I look at, like when you look at Sheldon from The Big Bang Theory, I don't want to shit on The Big Bang Theory, but you look at Sheldon, you go, okay, we all know who Sheldon is,
Yeah.
But then when you look at like Dale Cooper. When you look at Job, Job is a great one. Who over the course of like 5 seasons, we think at the end is like an openly gay man
Sure.
who is still terrible at magic, but also is like finding himself and is experiencing all these great things. Buster is a character who ends up being a murderer at the end of the show. So, it's nice to see characters like that. And that's Community to a T. There are so many different facets for all these different characters. And I think that's great. I think that as much as I think Dan Harmon is a giant asshole, I do think he's good at creating characters.
Yeah, but even if you watch, and I think we spoke about this, the pilot episode of Arrested Development, there's so much wonderful character development, even for a character like Job in just one episode. The idea that he has a magic wand in the basket of his Segway is so incredibly perfect. Like, the idea that he doesn't remember, and I think you and I discussed this, the sign in the cutscene is not the same as what he says, I think, to Michael. And so the idea that, like, even if that's just a mistake, the idea that Job forgot the name of the organization that he created is such a wonderful bit of character development. It's just small stuff like that. Yeah,
totally. We should talk about Abed, I guess, since this is pretty much Abed's episode.
Yeah, I mean, and definitely Abed and the way he and Frankie interact, because this also, I think, helps to explain all of these references to the montage that we see in this episode. So, John, in this interaction with Frankie where he's like using his iPhone to make like a time travel dinosaur movie, I think.
Awesome, by the way.
Fantastic. Yeah, he's using a French fry as a mustache.
That's good shit, man.
He makes this point about Frankie signifying the end of our show, and what he means is the show seems to now be more grounded, and because of that, it feels real in ways that, as he understands it, Community never has. And he makes this point about how the things that have always interested him were maybe these larger, more existential concerns. And so for Abed, he's really constructing this binary between shows that feel hyper real and shows that explore perhaps more speculative existential concerns. And I suppose one of the questions that I want us to discuss is, I mean, do we think those two aspects of storytelling can coexist, or is because, I mean, I want to argue they can, and I think the point of this episode is to challenge Abed and to say they can, but does one, like, whether it's reality or these larger existential concerns, does one of those become subservient to the other at some point? Like, can The Wire be an existentially rich television show, even though it's meant to feel hyper real? Or must you do the kinds of things that, like, David Lynch does if you really want to explore these larger, more speculative existential questions? I was curious if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's interesting with most shows, and I think I've said this as like a criticism before of Community, is it's a show that I don't think ever really committed to one side or the other. I think it always had its foot equally in maybe a little deeper in insanity, but there was still always a place of grounded, at least as far as like their relationships go, and not just with each other, but like with family, especially with family, like with Abed's father and Jeff's dad. That was always something that was super grounded and meant to be looked at in a more realistic light. And I think my biggest complaint at the beginning of the show was pick one, yeah,
I remember. Yeah.
But I think now, like, they've learned how to really balance that. So I would have to argue that I think that it is a feasible thing to do. Mm-hmm. I just think that, and much like Abed and much like the G.I. Jeff episode, which is my favorite episode of the show, maybe it's not something you want to include in your media that you love and think about every day. Maybe you want to leave that outside of this place that is like a comfort to you. And so I get Abed's argument, but I also agree that, they can coexist. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you because I don't like binary thinking, the idea that something needs to be either one thing or the other. I would like to think we can have maybe at times a kind of synthesis. And I think it's interesting because all of these, or at least the way Abed frames it, this idea that shows are real. Well, that seems to ignore the fact that it's a fucking show and it's not actually real. It's
Sure.
framed for you in a particular way. And so I would just reject the idea that there are realistic shows. I mean, this is something that I talk to my students about all the time when I teach, for example, literary realism. It's still a narrative that's framed by, if not an author, then a narrator, and the way they choose to unfold the story, because they don't include everything, right? I mean, you could imagine perhaps if you wanted something to be hyper real, it's not just about not having dragons and wizards, but it's also about maybe having this more, not only omnipresent, but omniscient narrator that maybe shows you everything. And in doing so, the narrative as a narrative really suffers. So the point is, things are always framed for you. Things are excluded from your purview. And to imagine that there's realistic storytelling, and we can include television and film in this, and then non-realistic, maybe even more fantastical storytelling, I think I just reject that whole binary because I just don't know, and I think this is one of Abed's larger points, what does it mean to experience something as real instead of imagining that your perception is also a kind of framing device? So I think I understand what people mean when they talk about a show like The Wire being realistic, but I think it becomes a problem for me when then figures like Abed suggest that things are becoming so grounded when, well, no, it's not. This is a television show. Nothing
Sure.
is actually grounded here. It's just grounded relative to these alternatives or what this show was before, if that makes any sense. And so I think I just reject the premise entirely.
So then I guess I have to ask you, how do you feel then about, because sort of directly after this moment when Abed is sort of, if we're looking at this like your hero's journey sort of thing, which it kind of is, he's at his lowest point, the speakeasy thing happens. Mm-hmm. So from a writing perspective and someone who, studies a lot more writing than I do, do you look at that as almost like a cop-out of the media itself to have this insanity sort of thrown full center, or do you think it works well? I mean, how do you feel about it?
Well, Abed tries, even before he discovers the speakeasy, to make reality not seem real. It's one of the first times I think we see a montage when his idea of embracing perhaps a more boring and tedious reality. Mm-hmm. John, he just makes a montage out of it. He makes two of them, if I recall correctly. So, and then shortly after this, he discovers the speakeasy, and, well, the show wants you to think he devolves in some way. And so I guess I just think Abed, and again, I think the end of the episode is so important because Frankie plays a kind of bait and switch, or the show does, where it wants us to think that Frankie is this extremely real, grounded character, but she's not. As you said before, mm-hmm. she delivers this really contrived monologue about how she's a boring person.
Right.
That's not how real people talk. And so the whole episode, I think, is attempting to do this work of suggesting that we shouldn't think of these in binary terms. Communities not becoming, again, like The Wire, this hyper-realistic show. It will be what it always is. And I think to some degree, all narrative is this, which is something contrived. But I'm not using the word contrived as a derogatory statement. I know we often think of a word like contrived as negative, but it's just, it's fabricated. It's contrived. It's not it doesn't unfold the way our lives do because that's not what it is. And so I think what is interesting, John, maybe to answer your question, is how the show wants you to think at times that it's moving away from what it is, but in those attempts to do that, it's just becoming it's deepening this sense of what it has always been. So even in those attempts to be something different, it's just doing what it has always done, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think what I find the most interesting about this, the speakeasy thing for me is it's almost as if these three characters, Britta and Jeff and Annie, their sort of like their mental break happens because it's almost like Abed subconsciously wills this to happen.
Sure.
And so the show has to make it so. Because in any other type of reality, I don't see Annie copping to this. I don't see her thinking, let's start a bar down behind Shirley's Sandwich Restaurant that we serve drinks to. I assume probably underage kids most likely are going to show up and drink. I mean, they do have the joke about carding people. Okay, whatever. But this is still fucking nuts that this is happening. And so I think, to me, like, this is the show's answer. The show itself has become, almost like sentient in understanding that Abed needs this and we need this as a show to continue. I think that's,
well,
I don't know.
Because, no, I think that's really good because, John, like, the thing I always talk to my students about is how genres are very much things we construct, but it often feels like narratives become sentient in some way and almost slot themselves into certain narratives or certain narrative frameworks, certain genres, certain ways of expecting for us. And I think part of what I like about that is this sense that the people who create things are not in as much control as maybe we want to think they are, which is, and I've said this so many times, if you want an interesting take about a piece of media you like, don't go to the person who made it because their take will be incredibly boring. Go to other people instead. But I also like this idea that Abed's function in this show, it's not something that he necessarily forces onto the show. It's almost like this is a necessity for this show. For all of Jeff's protesting that Abed is making this show intertextual, meta-referential. Look at what happens when Abed leaves. They basically take up that role. And so I think that's what I also like about this episode is how what Abed has done to this point for the show, it's not something that he has forced onto the narrative. It's something that the narrative has needed. It's a narrative necessity for this show. And when Abed leaves that role vacant, look, as you said, characters like Annie, characters like Jeff of all characters, fill that role. Fascinating, is it not?
Mm-hmm. No, for sure is. Yeah, and I think, I like that a lot. I love that Jeff, and that's what made me feel like this was willed to be by Abed, is that Jeff quotes Miller's Crossing.
He does. Yeah.
No one's going to quote Miller's Crossing. Come on. Are you kidding me?
I know. As we discussed earlier.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah,
so can we talk quickly? What is Garrett doing?
Which time? At the end?
Yes.
Oh, I don't know, man. I mean, I think that's I can go ahead and tell you Garrett doesn't become like a supervillain or something, but that's really what it feels like they're doing, right? Is like making him he becomes like, Lex Luthor at the end, So I don't know.
And then Leonard sees him.
Yeah.
And then Leonard breaks the fourth wall and gives a thumbs up to the cat, which I'm assuming is just a hey, we made it sort of.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
And then we get the bumpers, which are the wildest shit. And we have to discuss them because my brain hurts from thinking about if they're in universe or if this is fake.
Well, before we do all of that, since we were discussing Abed, can we
Sorry,
just
yes.
say something about the montage as
Oh, yeah,
a
of course,
cinematic
of
narrative
course.
form? I think we've talked about this.
We have
I
definitely
love-
talked about the montage, yeah.
So remind me, do you have as much affection for the montage as I do?
I don't think anyone does that I know of.
Yeah, I know. I love it so much. Yeah.
I think it's a lost art. I think I said that last time. I think it's like sort of a lost art form. My favorite montage of recent memory is is in Zack Snyder's Batman v Superman when he Dawn of Justice, the very sad montage of him saving people. He's like dragging the ship, and he's like, "Oh God!" He's like carrying the spaceship, and like he's like all the people in some country, Africa, South America. He's like, "Oh, this is like Hallelujah's playing by Leonard Cohen."
Yeah,
This is so fucking dumb. That's the last time I can remember seeing a montage and thinking, "This is bad. This is bad."
Well, I would say this. Understood maybe historically, what Zack Snyder does is not a proper montage. He's just eliminating time and mashing things together, which is not
for sure.
And I'll talk about Sergei Eisenstein in just a moment. That's not really how like these innovative early 20th century Russian filmmakers thought of the montage. Dude, yeah, like his montage work in Watchmen is so stupid because like that's where you get the Leonard Cohen song, and it's just it's so bad. It's so bad. But yeah, so Sergei Eisenstein, a movie I would recommend to everyone is Battleship Potemkin. We see beautiful
I've never seen
montages in that movie. But John, this is a quote from his selected works. He was a filmmaker, an essayist. And this is from a particular essay, The Montage of Film Attractions. And this is what he writes. I should call cinema the, quote, art of comparisons. In cinema, it is made up of the juxtaposition and accumulation in the audience's psyche of associations that the film's purpose requires. Associations that are aroused by the separate elements of the stated fact, associations that produce, albeit tangentially, a similar effect only when taken as a whole. And this is basically what he means. The montage, properly understood, is really a set of comparisons and juxtapositions. So, for example, like showing sequences from a war and then maybe included in that sequence someone somewhere else not in that battle, like, I don't know, falling down a flight of stairs or something. And so like putting these two things that feel so remarkably dissimilar together to extract some larger point. This episode has 5 montages, which is a lot for a 27-minute episode of television. And Eisenstein, I think this is also important, he referred to the montage as realistic artificialities. And so that's really fascinating when thinking about this episode, an episode that wants to think about realism and these larger, more existential concerns. But I think what Eisenstein really means here, John, is, as you and I have discussed, form dictates content. To really understand whether it's film or television, a novel, whatever, you must think about the form it takes first before you can really consider the content. So I think what this episode, through its use of the montage, suggests is that reality and more thematic concerns, like these larger existential concerns, they can and often do coexist harmoniously, which is why the episode uses the montage so much, because the montage is about these collections of juxtapositions. And this is an episode about crashing these seemingly disparate ideas, realism and these larger existential concerns together, which is why there are so many montages here. At least that's what I would argue.
Jesus Christ. I can't argue against that. I can't always pointing like he won. You did. You won.
It's not about winning.
You won
It's
the
not
big
about
game.
winning. No, it's just about. I'm just curious what you think about this. I'm not hoping for you to tell me I'm wrong or anything, because I don't think that's the point.
Because you're not, is what
I see.
We both know. No,
He said it, not me, but
no, I agree with you. I think for me, a montage has never been something that I have paid particular attention to. I think when I was younger, I used to love montages in movies. And I think I actually would get sad when they were over, because then I have to go back to like the reality of the story, and I don't want to do that.
I know.
I
That's
want
what
to see
mean.
more
Yeah.
of the montage. And I wonder like why that is. And you know, some of my favorite episodes of shows have the montage. The episode of Seinfeld when Jerry is trying to leave his girlfriend and be with the roommate instead, has this wonderful montage where they're trying to come up with George and Jerry are trying to come up with a plan for Jerry to leave his girlfriend so he can date his girlfriend's roommate. And they end up thinking, George says you should ask them for a menage a trois. And there's this whole big montage where it's like, and it almost feels like a play. It almost feels like a stage play, because there's like these like fade ins and fade outs with this like lulling saxophone behind it, and you can see as they're writing, like papers are piling up from where they've crumbled up ideas and thrown them away. And then we end the montage, and George's idea is ask for a menage a trois. But that has always been memorable to me because I've never seen that in like a sitcom show before, you know. And I think what the montage is capable of, and I know you like this too, is that the camera shows you what it wants to.
Yeah.
And by doing a montage, it's getting even more power, because
Absolutely.
I can frame you any way I want. But I can fade out and frame back in, and in the background I could have like your bed's made up differently or something. So something
and
has
juxtapose
changed.
it with whatever you want to make a larger point without
Correct.
question. Yeah, that's really good. John, dude, fantastic. I was thinking as you were talking of this book by someone named Anna Kornblue. It's called The Order of Forms, Realism, Formalism, and Social Space. And what she basically, one of the things she argues in this book is, when we say we like something, we often think we are identifying the content of a thing. But her point is, what we like is the form the thing takes. And so, like, as you were saying, that Seinfeld episode, I think she would probably say, the thing you like is not the idea that George proposes a menage a trois. It's the form those moments take that leads to that content. As you were saying, the thing that was really appealing to you was the form the montage took that led to this moment. I mean, even people like, Zack Snyder is a terrible filmmaker, but when people say they like Zack Snyder, I think they just have bad taste. I'll say this, but I think what they're really suggesting is I like the form of his movies. Like I like the form his films take.
Sure.
I think it's bad, but I think that's what they ultimately like. Like, I think they like, 8-packs and like Ben Affleck and like the Punchies and the
Punchies?
I think that's what they think they like, but what they really like is just the form itself. And so, like, this is an episode that offers what I think should be a consistent reminder that what you like is the form of a thing, not the content of a thing. So important.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think some of my favorite films of all time have montages, like the Goodfellas montage when we're seeing all the dead people in the ice truck, and Morty's getting stabbed in the fucking back with a ice pick, and there's like the montage in The Godfather when he's in church, and his son's being baptized versus like all these people that he's having ruthlessly, brutally murdered.
Exactly.
That's a great
fantastic.
one.
Fantastic.
That's a good. Have you heard of that movie? You heard of that Godfather? What a flick!
Hey, so do you think, like, using this then, Isn't this like basically Scorsese's criticism of Marvel movies? It's a formal critique and not like a matter of content. Like,
I
what
would
do you
agree
think?
with that.
Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like it's really just about the form the movies take.
Yeah. Yeah, they're not there's no sense of being challenged at all with a Marvel
Yeah.
movie. It's essentially just an episode of Friends that they shot in 2 hours with a big budget, and that's all it is.
You know, I was thinking, like, the more the moment when Cap like grabs that hammer and says "Avengers," a symbol, and like
Yeah.
bandit, bandit, bandit.
So no
Chandler-
one told you like. They come out and clap. Da, 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 da.
Chandler walks in.
Man,
What's the deal with Thanos? Yeah.
can I get any more dead? Anyway. Oh, that's bad taste. I forgot he did just pass away. Oh no,
Oh,
I
no,
didn't mean
you're
it that
like,
way.
What's the deal's a Seinfeld thing, not a Chandler thing.
We're all over the place. Anyway, quickly, these bumpers, Colin.
Yeah, no, quickly, John. The bumpers, my friend.
Number
Yeah,
one,
no, this is amazing, right?
is this just a fake show that they shot for? Okay, within the reality of the show.
Yeah, please. Okay.
Okay,
Sure.
within the reality of the show, is this a fucking NBC show? Within the reality of Community.
I mean, I don't know because like within the episode proper, Britta actually says she moved to Atlanta and became the chef for what, like a brilliant but troubled detective. So I mean, is this Abed's imagination at work? Is this what he thinks Shirley? Because he even says, "Did Shirley spin off?" I think this is like the show imagining
Okay.
what Shirley's life is like. I
I'm
don't
cool
know
with
how
that.
you feel about that, but yeah.
I'm cool with that. But then, what's the deal with the noose? What's the deal with the noose? What is
See,
it?
this
Why
is
does the
what
noose
happens-
move around? Why?
This is what happens when you allow David Lynch to direct these like 90-second vignettes that you place at the end of your episodes.
So nothing happens with that. It's just there.
Oh, I don't recall anything happening.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. It's so eerie. It fucked me up a little bit.
Bring me a noose. Make the noose move.
I've had 2 cookies and a Coke. Fantastic.
Well, it almost feels like the noose moves like people do in the Red Room a little bit, you know?
Oh my God. Anyway. Is that it? Is that our conversation for this wonderful episode of television, Colin?
I like the noose.
No noose is good news. Anyway, that's our conversation, Colin.
Diane. We forgot about Diane.
Okay, Diane.
So all of the emails. Okay, I contacted John. I searched. I couldn't find information about this on the internet. So I contacted the Communities guys. They
Thank you.
responded to my message. Yeah, thank you as always.
Discipline daddies.
Yes, they are. Yeah, you can reject my emails anytime. Goo. But yeah, but no, this was their response. It was part of the early marketing for the season. There was even a website we, and by we, like fans of the show, could go and contact someone named Diane or get an email from Diane. It was very weird and it wasn't well thought out. So apparently people would like try to like get information, but the email, they wouldn't get responses. They were emailing someone named Diane. So apparently the Communities people theorized this is like the show acknowledging the clumsiness of this marketing strategy.
Oh, and obviously, it has to be a play on Twin Peaks. It has to be.
John, I mean, this episode feels. I mean, I think we've successfully argued that like David
Yes.
Lynch probably did like a script rewrite for this episode. So
It feels like it. It does. All right.
It feels like it. Yeah. Okay. Well, let us transition to some of our segments. John, who makes the Dean's List? Who is your best performance?
Best performance. Wow. That's a hard one. Jeez. Britta made me laugh a lot. A whole lot.
Yeah.
She has gone insane. I think I would give it to her or Chang. I'm going to give it to Britta. Britta is she's so funny. What about
Yeah.
you?
Well, I think it's just because this is such a important Frankie episode, I guess, for her place in this season. Francesca Dart, excellent introduction to a TV show. Mine's Frankie. John, I need you to, start of a new season, have a whole new syllabus. I need you to, some new course policies. John, I need you to check the syllabus, and this is where you identify your favorite bit of metatextual referencing and intertextual play. What do you got?
I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on the shoulder of Orion. I've watched sea beams glitter on the Tannhauser Gate. All these things will die like tears in rain.
Beautifully read.
That's mine, Colin. What about you?
Well, I think mine, borrowing or pivoting from that, the, I don't know, like 2013, 2014 fascination with disc golf. Because that's what
I still play disc golf. What a game. What a
Yeah,
game.
yeah. I mean, it just seems like all of my friends were really into it like a decade ago. So
I'm
like
into
really
it now.
into it. Like really
So-
like no, John, like this is the first time you've mentioned it and we've spoken for over an hour. So you're definitely not into it in the way these people were like a decade ago. So anyway.
Yeah, actually mine's Leonard's Tears in Rain, Blade Runner thing.
Blade
It's
Runner,
great.
yeah. Very good.
I did not write down. There's a couple lines and I forgot to fucking write them down. My best lines. One is Chang saying I've been reliving this day over and over. Nobody seems to notice that Chang has lost his goddamn mind. But there's a great little back and forth with Annie and Britta where Annie says, Britta's like, Frankie called Annie a bitch, and Annie's like, she implied I was bitch. And Britta goes, Frankie implied Annie was a stuck-up bitch.
He's so drunk. Yeah. Yeah,
That was so good. That was so good.
Said
Anyway.
she was a stuck-up bitch who thinks she's better than everybody else.
That was so
Yeah.
good.
It was really funny. Yeah, I have a couple. Speaking of guilt, where surely that's something Abed says. You have my word as leader of the white people. There's no cause for alarm. And then Frankie enters. Our friend used to sit there, and then Abed says she spun off. Very funny. I have in marketing we call it the good Belushi. My phone got lodged in my pocket. I know. I guess that is a thing. I'm going to name one of my sandwiches after her. My sandwiches suck. That's a Britta line.
Suck.
Yeah. That's the most interesting take on not being interesting I've ever heard. I third Annie's number 2ing of the movement Britta made. That's a thing Jeff says. Abed's, yes, that was a test. You guys are bad friends. Very funny. Dude, hey, Mr. Winger, nice lecture yesterday. Don't patronize me, Dave. You guys know this is a Chang line. I thought you would like this. You guys know Reddit? 4chan? Because it's awesome.
Because it's awesome.
Okay, dude. 2 lines from the end of the episode
Oh,
between Shirley
They're so
and
good.
who's what's this actor's
Stephen
name?
Weber.
Stephen Weber from the delightful show Wings, featuring one Tony Shalhoub. I'm just a detective from the swamps of Atlanta who can't even walk.
Oh my
And then he
God,
tips
dude.
over his
So fucking
wheelchair.
good.
Dude, as they're leaving the room, I have a feeling someone's gonna murder some tater tots tonight. That's no mystery at all.
Steven Weber's so good. You know, he if you ever want to put yourself through 46 hours of listening to an audiobook, he reads Stephen King's It, the audiobook version that
Does
I
he
have listened
really?
to. Yes, he's very good,
fantastic.
actually.
Yeah,
He's
no,
very,
this
very
is
good.
great. Like the fact that the idea that Atlanta has a bayou or something is one of the funniest things I've ever. This is
The
so
swamps
fucking
of
funny.
Atlanta. Oh, God. That's amazing.
Oh, John, that is our conversation for season 6, episode 1 of Community Ladders.
Oh my
John, as
God.
we mentioned earlier, we
Yes.
have a Patreon page.
We have a Patreon For $3 a month, you get all the exclusive juicy content. For $7 a month, you get the content, a sticker, and you become producer of the show. Every episode, we thank you and talk about how much we love you. Above that, you get a shirt, sticker, a producer, the content. Above that, I don't know. What do you want? Come hang out. We'll have some brownies, some cookies. I don't give a fuck. You name it. Chocolate milk? Yes, please. Check it off the list, Colin.
Unsalted almonds? I have diabetes. That's what I'll bring.
Colin's bringing the boring snacks. Colin, can we name our producers, please?
We can. These are the following producers of the Hop-Ons podcast. Thank you to Katana Crindy, Rachel, Kate, Daniel, Lars, Rob, Robin. Oh, hey, Robin, send us an email. Check Patreon. You'll know why. This is how I'm doing things now. What did I say? Rob, Robin, Jeff, and Andrew, and John's right. It's the first link in the show notes. The second link is to our Threadless page if you wanted to buy Hop-Ons podcast merchandise. And John, if someone were so inclined as to rate and review the podcast, what would you say? What would I you can speak for me. What would I say?
I would say, my name is Colin Cox, and I'm beautiful. I have great abs, and I smell amazing. Please review my podcast. Even though it is the last season, it would still help the show get noticed when people search for it. We should say it's the last season, but the show, we're not going to take it off. Colin is putting shows on YouTube, and I'd like to help him do the same, so we'll put shows on YouTube. So eventually, maybe you won't be able to hear him on a podcatcher because it does cost money for us to throw that shit up there. But you could still go to YouTube and be like, oh, there's the boys. I'm going to listen to the boys today, and you can listen to us. Whatever you want to do. Anyway, rate and review the show. How fucking hard is it? Huh? We've been here for 7 goddamn years, Colin.
We're just getting belligerent at this point. If you listen to this podcast and you haven't given us a rating and review, fuck you.
Yeah.
Fuck you. GFY.
Yeah.
Go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself. We'll let Earth will decide. Earth will decide.
What the fuck does that mean?
It's all that crazy shit.
Earth will decide. Oh my God.
GFY. Go fuck yourself. Yeah, he's like, Earth will decide. Who's wrong or right in this situation? Earth will decide. Earth will decide.
By the way, I should say our Patreon episode, dude, was so good. The Superlatives episode.
Oh, fantastic.
Where you did the intro from GPT wrote the intro for as Donald Trump. That shit to this day makes me cackle from laughter. I can't handle it.
It was good fun. Yeah. No,
that was a good time. That was a good episode.
Write the well, again, it's not a script, but it's just something I've memorized to say. But what if Donald Trump basically wrote, how would that sound coming out of Trump's mouth? And it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
Can't wait for that guy to get back. Love that dude. Gonna see him real soon.
I'm afraid so. Yeah. Hey, Rudy filed for bankruptcy. Did you see
Rudy?
Rudy, yeah.
He'll be on the show pretty soon. He's got nothing else going on. Colin.
Yeah, no,
that's about it.
We'll give him the Hop-Ons bump.
Yeah, that's what he needs. All right.
That's what he needs.
Until next time. Thank you for listening to the Hop-Ons podcast. I'm John.
My name is Colin Cox. Thank you, buddy.
All right. See you, man.